Pax Christi, which is Latin for Peace of Christ, was founded after World War II by French and German Catholics who wanted to reconcile. It's grown to become the International Catholic Peace Movement. Western Massachusetts has a local chapter, and every year it meets with other state Pax Christi chapters to re-energize and strategize for future campaigns. Steve Kiltonick traveled to Palmer to learn more about what's on the group's agenda.
On a snowy April 12th, Pax Christi, Massachusetts held its annual 2025 spring retreat at St. Thomas the Apostle Parish Center in Palmer. It's part of Pax Christi USA and Pax Christi International, which has chapters in over 60 countries. Pax Christi, Massachusetts was established in 1992 and is present in 15 parishes, shrines, and schools across the state. Its mission is
to live the peace of Christ by making the world safe from all forms of violence and injustice.
Banners were displayed highlighting some of Pax Christi campaigns: justice for all migrants and immigrants, the abolishment of war, racial justice and healing from trauma, respect for the planet, and the abolishment of nuclear weapons and guns. The day-long retreat featured prayer led by Pastor Rick Turner and a discussion of the current group action plans taking place in the state. Sisters Rita Raboyne and Linda Bassam belong to the Sisters of Notre Dame du Namur congregation in Somerville.
We feel very blessed coming to these retreats and being reinforced and edified, really, by the people who come to share, and also among ourselves. You talk and reflect about what you heard, and we strengthen each other.
We have to do it together, even if it's only small communities of people, and say, yeah, I'm willing to fight for justice, even if there's only a few of us at times that are, seemingly willing to do it.
The main speaker was Brad Wolf, a former prosecutor, professor, community college dean, and executive director of Peace Action Network of Lancaster, Pennsylvania. Wolf is also editor of A Ministry of Risk, Writings on Peace and Nonviolence, a book he released in 2024 on the collected writings of peace activist Philip Berrigan. Wolf's topic was Hope for the Long Haul, Finding Our Place in Poetic Time.
I want to integrate that background and some of the ideas that Phil had into this idea of poetic reality, into the idea of story, because I think Phil found himself in a story that he had written for himself, and that's what helped him have that hope and resistance for the long haul.
Wolf incorporated Berrigan's spirituality into his discussion and gave a bio of Phil and his brother Dan, who became a Jesuit brother. An Army combat veteran during World War II, Phil witnessed discrimination and worked for civil rights. He later opposed the Vietnam War after witnessing U.S. militarism take advantage of impoverished third world countries. Although he loved the Catholic Church, Phil believed the Church was not calling its members to do their duty in the service of peace and social justice. Phil and Dan, both Catholic priests, were known for their highly publicized anti-war activities in the late 1960s. In 1967, Phil broke into Baltimore's Selective Service headquarters and poured blood on draft cards. In 1968, he entered the Catonsville, Maryland Draft Board and burned hundreds of draft cards with homemade napalm. Catholic leaders, however, criticized the brothers.
And that's a question that Phil was always asking himself. What does Christ ask of me? And he tried to live out that question in the best way he could by putting his life and his freedom on the line.
Daniel Berrigan and his brother Philip are now facing up to 30 years in jail for their latest protest.
Their activism put them at the forefront of the national anti-war movement. Phil, who became involved with the anti-nuke Plowshares movement, continued to speak out against injustice until his death from cancer at the age of 79. Wolf said he was blown over by Dan Berrigan's poetic books, but gravitated more towards Phil's writing style.
He seemed to have the same kind of personality that people in my family did, very direct, very forthright, right to the point, and so I was able to relate to his writings in a personal way. And I also found his writings to be very profound.
Wolf researched 44 years of Berrigan's works because he felt a new generation could learn from Phil's writings.
The courage and the bravery of Phil inspired me, and I thought if I can communicate that to young people, maybe they'll be inspired.
Attendees also viewed the film The Berrigans, Disarmed and Dangerous, which chronicled the brothers' story through the eyes of Phil's daughter, Frida. Wolfe explained the book title and why Berrigan should be mentioned in the same breath as the other peace activist icons of the time.
That title comes from a speech that he was giving to another young priest and was saying that we must engage in a ministry of risk, not just as priests, but as human beings, as Catholics, as laypersons. He lives out the faith in a way that very few people have. So he is right up there with Dorothy Day, with Martin Luther King, with Thomas Merton. Phil was simply following the Word of God as he understood it, which is to stand with the weak, with those who are suffering.
For me, his story is inspirational, not just to, not just to talk about it, but to really to live out the message and to willing to accept the consequences, for taking the risks to live out the message.
Wolfe has brought together secular and faith-based groups to work on peace initiatives. As coordinator of the Merchants of Death War Crimes Tribunal, Wolfe exposed the military-industrial complex.
Been arrested at the Pentagon a couple of times, at the U.S. Capitol, all for nonviolent resistance.
What does Wolfe hope people learn from his talk and Phil Berrigan?
I hope people find themselves in the same poetic time that Phil found himself in. That idea of being in a poetic story, that we all play a role in the greater scheme of things. We're not isolated. If we all work together the way Phil taught us to do, we can have an impact.
The retreat concluded with a discussion of the Berrigan film, prayer, and evening mass at St. Thomas the Apostle Church. For Real to Real, I'm Steve Kiltonic.
If you are interested in getting more information about Pax Christi or in joining the Western Mass chapter, contact Jean Allen at jallen10sp@gmail.com.